Welcome to the Powerful Teaching Podcast. My name is Jorge Valenzuela, and today I am your host. So to all the listeners and all the viewers, don't be alarmed. Dr. Marquita Blades is still with us. She's still our host, okay? I'm just filling in for one day. And so actually, I'm interviewing Dr. Blades this morning, and who is the host of your podcast, as you know. Dr. Blades, how are you?
I'm doing great, George. Thank you for taking over the show today.
Well, it's a pleasure. I recently did the Learning Unleashed podcast. I was asked to host. It's a 10-minute podcast. It's not any video or anything like that. So it seems like I'm getting more and more of these opportunities. So thank you.
You are so welcome. I'm excited to talk to you. And I'm excited to be in the interviewee seat instead of the interviewer seat.
I know, because I went on your YouTube channel and you've been interviewing people for a number of years now. It's not something that you're brand new to. So how did you get into that?
Well, when I first left teaching, I was a little lost and I really didn't know I knew what I wanted to do. I knew I wanted to stay close to education. I wanted to consult and I wanted to speak. I just didn't know what the structure of any of that would look like. But I spoke at a women's empowerment conference in South Carolina. And at that conference, I met a woman who was also from Atlanta, and she had her own internet radio show. And she invited me to be a guest on her show. And when I participated, there was something about being in that studio and talking about education that felt so natural to me that I approached her and asked, what does it take to have your own show? And I would say within 3 weeks of me asking her that question, I was hosting the first episode of the Dr. Marquita Blades show.
Wow, that's amazing. And there's one time that I saw you do a live, and you were in Panama and you were introducing something or someone, and this is over a year ago. So, forgive me if I forgot. But what I immediately saw was that you were very dynamic in how you spoke and your smile and the way you addressed folks. And I immediately thought to myself, man, I can't do that. And so now, like a whole year later, I'm actually doing it. So I feel like, God or the universe is, blessing me to now follow in your footsteps. And so, everyone has an origin story. And I heard a quote once that there's not a person you wouldn't love if you didn't hear his or her story. So Dr. Blades, what is your origin story as a young person? You don't have to go all the way through now, but just tell us about how you began in life.
George, I'm from a small town. I grew up in Griffin, Georgia, which is about maybe 60 something miles south of Atlanta. And my perspective on my childhood is different now that I'm older and I'm exposed. I definitely had a great childhood in terms of being raised in a loving household and having a family that really cared and poured into me. But I was underexposed. So there were just a lot of things that looking back now, I didn't have, and I didn't realize that I didn't have them, but I was a very quiet child. I was shy and reserved. I kept to myself and pretty much was nerdy. I liked going to school. I looked up to my teachers and wanted to be one, wanted to emulate them. Rather than go outside and play, I like to stay in the house and read books. So I was often perceived as being stuck up because I didn't talk to other kids in school, but it really was because I was so shy and so timid, and I was afraid of the sound of my own voice. I hated for the teacher to call on me. I would rather just write my answers down, turn my paper in, get my A, and we never had to talk about it. I didn't want to be recognized for my accomplishments. I really just wanted to fly under the radar.
Wow. So that really couldn't have felt very good. But when we're young, we don't really realize that we're experiencing trauma and
Right.
that we're actually, harming ourselves. So, what would you recommend to young women today that feel the way that you felt? What would you say? Like my daughter's 18. What would you tell my daughter?
Well, George, I always felt like something was wrong with me because I didn't talk a lot. I didn't understand that there were personality types, and some personalities don't talk as much or are not as social as others. So I don't know if people made me feel that way or I just felt that way. I don't know what the language is, but for lack of terminology, I will say I was always made to feel as if something was wrong with me because I wasn't social. But I guess I should also throw in that I did come from an environment where if girls were too vocal or too social, then they were labeled or they were told, you need to stop being fresh, stop being hot, uh, don't dance in front of boys, and, don't do certain things. So on the inside, George, I wanted to get up and dance sometimes when the music came on, but I didn't because I didn't want to be labeled or put
Right.
into that category. And so what I realized when I got much older is that while yes, I am an introvert, I do also have a dynamic personality. I do like to have fun. I mean, I started dancing as an adult and taking actual dance classes and, performing with a dance group. And that wasn't new for me. That was something I had always wanted to do, but I wasn't encouraged in that way. You were supposed to just kind of be seen and not heard. And I took on all of that. So when I did as a child try to get into these situations where I would make friends and fit in with a group, I was so awkward. And girls would say, "Oh, she has a smart mouth and she rolled her eyes at me if she did." And I wasn't doing any of those things on purpose. I just didn't know how to conduct myself with a group of girls. And so it just always came across wrong, which then caused me to retreat even more. And I just thought there must be something wrong with me that I can't be in a group of girls or I can't make friends with people. Or when I got older in high school and boys would try to talk to me and ask me for my phone number, I wouldn't know what to say. And so they would think that I thought I was too good to be their girlfriend when really I just wasn't comfortable enough to have a conversation with them.
Well, you know what, Dr. Blades? I think you're a natural at performing, and you inspired me when I first saw your session at the Virtual STEM Summit about a year ago. And you were standing up and you were doing your thing like it was a classroom, even though we were virtual. And to be honest with you, prior to, I did a lot of workshops online, but I was always sitting down. And I just felt, wow, look at this person standing up and doing her thing, even though it's virtual. And I said, let me do the same thing because that's where I'm best. And I've been standing up ever since. I think when I sit down now, it's because my knees hurt. But yeah, so that's due to you. So yeah, so you're very inspirational, and that's a very good thing as a teacher. So speaking about that, inspiration. And you mentioned earlier that you would look at your teachers and you wanted to be a teacher. So
Yeah.
what really set you on your path in education? And what or who was the main inspiration?
I love telling this story. Well, first of all, my mom instilled a love of learning in me. She really reinforced doing your homework and taking pride in your work. And
Mhm.
she spent a lot of time with my brother and I, who my brother has passed on now, and we were 2 years apart, but
Sorry.
um, I would do his homework because I was always eager to learn and I was a fast learner. So when she would work with him on his homework, I would be so curious that she would just go ahead and teach it to me. So when I went to school, there was just always this readiness to know more. And I thought teachers knew everything. And because my mother was very active, would come into the classroom and volunteering and bringing things, school just felt like the right thing. I always enjoyed it. And I can't remember ever wanting to be anything else but a teacher. But two teachers that really stand out, my 8th grade Georgia history teacher, Mrs. Janice Massack. Miss Massack did not play any games. Listen, you came in that classroom, you sat down, you took notes. Her tests were essay questions. So you had to write everything out in sentences. And what I loved about that class, I didn't know at the time, but she was really preparing me to just learn how to be an independent learner and to study on my own. So I always appreciate her for that. And I knew I wanted to be a teacher, but the one who really turned the tide for me was my freshman biology professor at Georgia State University. Her name was Dr. Donna Adams. I will never forget. She was the first Black woman that I ever saw who had a PhD. So the first Black doctor who wasn't a medical doctor. And I was in the same room with her. I had never experienced that before. So when she walked in, because when you signed up for your classes back then, it just had the last name Adams. And I was completely expecting a white man to walk in. But she walked in on the first day. Skin was glowing. She had a bun pulled back nice and tight, and she had on her dress slacks and a button down. And I was like, oh my goodness, that's the professor? And when she started teaching, the way she taught the biology concepts just made it so practical. So George, I guess I should tell you, I wanted to be a high school language arts teacher. Because my language arts teacher in 11th grade, Mrs. Carol Ann Marshall, this lady was so prim and proper and elegant, and she had helped me get a job because I used to sleep in her class. So I'm getting way off topic, but I'll bring it back around, okay?
Wait, hold on. And don't forget, this is your show.
Okay. So I'm gonna bring it all back.
Okay.
Carol Ann Marshall, my 11th grade language arts teacher, I used to ace everything in her class because remember, I didn't play about my schoolwork, but I had 2 jobs at the time and I would be really tired. So I figured with Mrs. Marshall's class, because I was doing well, that was the class that I could sleep in and still get a good grade. But she didn't want me sleeping. She wanted me awake and paying attention. So one day she took me out into the hallway and she asked me, why are you always sleeping in my class? And at first I had an attitude because part of my background was, if somebody asks you something and you don't feel like being bothered, you put them in their place. And I said to her, why are you asking me? I get my A in this class, so why are you bothering me? And she said, because I just really want to know, why a student of your caliber sleeps in class. And I told her, it's because I'm tired, because I'm working 2 jobs. And she asked me why I was working so much. And I told her, because I contribute to our household. So I have to have money to do that. But then I also got to have money so I can look halfway decent when I come to school. So George, one check was to help support the household. And the other check was to keep myself up in clothes and, all the little stuff that you want to do as a teenager. Wow. Well, when I told her that, she didn't like the amount of hours I was working, and so she stepped in and she knew the owners of a store in Griffin called the Sock Shop. It's a pretty famous store in the Southeast.
Shout out to
the Sock Shop, but they sell more socks.
Okay.
She talked to the owners and they hired me, and they paid more than what I was working on my other jobs. And so I was able to, I still had 2 jobs, but the way it was structured now was such that I worked at the Sock Shop on the weekends, and I made enough there that I only had to do like a couple of shifts during the week at Taco Bell. And it really alleviated a lot of stress. And I ended up keeping that job at the Sock Shop through my sophomore year in college. They would even let me come back and work during the breaks. So Miss Carol Ann Marshall, okay. Now, going back to college. So Carol Ann Marshall is why I wanted to be an English teacher. So we went from always wanting to be a teacher to wanting to be an English teacher because of how she carried herself, and she was just so elegant. And I learned a lot of new vocabulary in her class. Fast forward now back to college, in walks Dr. Donna Adams, and she starts putting down this biology in a way that I never heard it before. And she's Black, and she has a PhD. And I said, oh, okay, now I'm going to be a science teacher. And
Wow.
that was that.
Wow. Now I love ELA, and I think ELA needs to be, every teacher needs to focus on, literacy, in my opinion. But I think science, I think we can teach English and math through science and social studies. I
Absolutely.
would make them like the main core and weave English and math into everything else. So, Dr. Blades, as I'm listening to you and hearing your story and just listening to some of the ways that, I don't want to say held back, but
Mm-hmm.
things that happened to you could have held you back. And
Oh, absolutely.
yeah, and I just think that you're an exceptional person. You definitely have tenacity and grit and perseverance and all those things. Wouldn't it be great if our young people did not have to do those things? And from birth, they could focus on what they want to do, their passions, turning them into purpose and having their own business, right? So,
Yeah. And so many of my friends also worked that I really didn't think there was anything uncommon about it. It wasn't until I got to college
mhm.
and met people who their parents just put the money in their bank account. And I I met a girl in college who didn't know how to write a check. And granted, a lot of high schoolers don't know how to write a check. I get that. But because I had to be so responsible in high school, that was something that, and I wasn't taught this by my mom. No shade to my mom, but you can only teach what you know. So she taught me and instilled a lot in me, but there were also a lot of things that I just had to kind of learn them from somewhere else. And I
Right.
learned about having a checking account, hearing from a friend who had one. And George, I just took it upon myself one day to call a cab to take me to the bank and to get my bank account. But thankfully, I had an auntie who worked for a bank and she could kind of help me with that. But I was kind of self taught when it came to these things. I didn't realize that even though getting a checking account is an advanced thing for a high schooler to do, but having to go and get it by yourself, that's a survival thing. And I didn't know that. So when
Yeah.
I got to college and I met a friend who had a checking account that her parents set up for her and put the money in for her, and then she didn't know how to fill out the check herself, I was so confused. I was so confused.
Yeah. I'm definitely, so for my daughter, she turned 18 in October and she just got a full ride for elementary childhood education at Longwood University.
Congratulations
Shout
on
outs
that.
to Longwood
Yes.
and to my daughter. Um, but she wanted to get a retail job, I want to say about half a year ago. And I was adamant for so many years of her not working because I've been working since 15 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And so like as a stock boy, bus boy, things like that. And so I didn't want her to do that. I wanted her to focus on her work, but she just wanted to have her own money. And so I convinced her to come work for me. And after a month, she said, I'm glad that I'm working for you because I'm understanding how a business is run and I'm able to help you instead of help somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I went with her and my son and they got their bank accounts and I did all the things that weren't done for me, but like you, I had to figure out on my own. And so, speaking of figuring out things on our own, Dr. Blades, you are a very successful entrepreneur, consultant, writer, speaker. How did you get on this path? We want to know. So we're like, yeah. We want to know.
Now that I can look back on it and put all of the pieces together, like it was always meant for me to be where I am now. I'll just say that part first. George, my mom used to take my brother and I to the library every other Saturday.
Hmm.
We didn't have a car, so she used to most likely borrow one of my auntie's cars, and she would drop us off at the library while she went to do whatever errands she did. So reading has always been a part of my daily life. It's always been a passion of mine. I always wanted to write a book. I used to make little paper books and staple them together and do stuff like that. But I honestly thought you get to write a book when you come from a certain something. And I didn't think I came from a certain something. So I figured that would just be something I always wanted to do.
Mhm.
Teaching was something I knew I could realistically do. I wanted to do it. So I became a teacher. And I'm very thankful, even though teaching gets a bad rap and sometimes it's looked at as a fallback career, I'm very thankful that I can say the thing I wanted to do with my life, I was able to do it for 16 years, because a lot of people want to do something with their life and they never have the courage or get the opportunity to do it. So I do want to say that part first. When I left teaching, one of the things that the first business coach I had, he said, you have to write a book. You have to make yourself an authority. So you need to write a book. But I couldn't get off the fence and start writing because I just kept questioning what I had to offer that anyone would want to read about and pay money for. I'm just a teacher who left the classroom prematurely because she was too sick to continue doing her job. I applied for many instructional coach positions and never even got one single interview, George. So I'm like, what do I have to write and share? I've never been teacher of the year. I've been nominated several times. I'm like the Susan Lucci of the teacher of the year. I've been nominated, but I've never won. What accolades do I have and what qualifies me? But I got an opportunity to participate in an anthology. And my husband said, do that to get your feet wet. So I participated, I contributed to an anthology called The Whole Truth, where teachers were just telling the whole truth about what it means to be a teacher. And that inspired me then to do my own anthology and invite other teachers to write with me. And so that was the Mediocre Teacher Project. And from there, I realized that, wow, anthologies is my niche because I get to both write and then I get to teach and coach the other writers who are contributing their chapters. So my girlfriend and I started the Girlfriend Collective, and we have a successful anthology series. I think we're 4 books in, and they all are Amazon bestsellers in multiple categories. So we've been very successful with that. So how did I become an author? Because I always wanted to, and then I just ended up in a place where the timing and the positioning was right for me to take the opportunity and start writing.
Mm. And you know what's so crazy about writing? Like for me, I think of writing like as music. DMX just passed away, and other amazing rappers that had amazing voices, and they're still here because of their music.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I look at, like, I'm thinking about your story and I think about my story and other people of color, like, we don't have heirlooms and we don't have dynasties and all those things.
Yeah.
And even when we leave the world, we may not have a lot of money and things like that, but our writing and our art is still here. And so someone can always, benefit from it as long as it's evergreen. And so one thing that I try to do in all of my writing is to make it evergreen and to make it as honest as possible, so that whoever is reading it, they can pick it up right where they are, and they can know that the one who wrote this thing, he started out as a beginner, and I may be a beginner or I may be a little further along than where he started, but I can take something from this. And that's why it's written in a theme, 2 ways to do this, 3 steps for doing that, right? And so, it's for the person that will never get to meet me, but also, which people don't know, is when I'm gone, that's what my contribution is. And so I love what you just said. And so for someone that is just starting out, right? They want to be a consultant, they want to be a speaker, but they don't necessarily know how to start or where to go. What are 3 things that you would recommend that they do?
Well, I do coach teachers who want to become a consultant. I don't offer that service mainstream yet. I just kind of help the people who come to me
Mhm.
and I work with them. But some of the things that I tell them, and I guess the top 3 would just be own what you know and to realize that there is some value. There's something that you do so very well, and you're probably overlooking how well you do it. So I tell them to think about what is it that your colleagues come to you for the most and ask you about the most. And that's probably the thing that you're gifted in, and you don't even realize you're gifted in because you do it so often and so well that it's second nature to you.
Mm,
I share this quote with them all the time. What's obvious to you is amazing to others.
mm,
And George, it took for me being pushed out there. I didn't plan that I'm going to leave teaching at this particular time and start my consultancy. Because I physically couldn't do the job anymore, I had to start my consultancy because what was I going to do? So I had to learn all of this on the fly. And I just started submitting proposals to any conference that really would accept it. Like if they accepted it, I came and spoke. And that's how I crafted my message. I had to pay attention to the feedback and start fine tuning things and paying attention to what people wanted to hear versus what I wanted to talk about. And my stuff kind of grew out of that. But now I can look back and tell people, look at what you're already doing and the feedback you're getting from people in an informal setting. And that's probably where your gifts lie. And then from there, just to be intentional, put yourself out there, but be intentional with it. And don't worry about putting your name everywhere in the beginning, because that is a mistake that I will say that I made. Because I was so eager for people to know who I was, like I wasn't leaving teaching with a strong network. So I felt like I had to really hit the ground running and get my name in a lot of places so I could become known and so I could blow up. But in doing that, George, I put my name in a lot of places where now I wouldn't want my name in
oh,
those environments and in those ecosystems. So I guess to put it plainly, like don't be thirsty when you get out there.
yeah, I definitely agree with the part about the doing what you know and what you love to do. What a lot of people don't know is that, before computer science became a thing, and before it was really part of education reform and really part of the future of education, that was my undergrad, that was my major in undergrad. And so I was learning about that at 18 and 19 years old. I developed an expertise in that. And so I always say to people, look, do what you love to do what you know how to do, and don't worry about money.
Yeah.
You should never do anything for money. If you're doing anything for money, then that means that the passion and purpose, in my opinion, isn't really there. You need to do what you love and flip it into a purpose to help other people. And like you said, there's someone out there that is going to think that your obvious is the most amazing thing in the world.
Mm-hmm.
So I just think that if people do that, instead of worrying about what the next big thing is going to be in
Right.
education, and just focus on what they like to do. Like for me, social and emotional learning, um, I bought the emotional intelligence book 2, 3 years ago. I was focusing on that because I wanted to find an algorithm for managing emotions. Now, I'll be honest, I never thought that would be the focal point of workshops. But hey, if people want that and you know how to do it, right? I just think it's an important thing to do. And, putting your name out there, that I think that, people need to do that. But I think that you made an amazing point of doing it in a way where you're putting it in the places that you want to be. And I've never heard it that way. And I appreciate that. And because I was kind of like doing like what, Kevin Hart said in his book. He wrote a book called I Can't Make This Up. That's the name of the book. And I think on the road for like a straight year, I listened to his story, because what was amazing about him was that when, movies weren't working out for him, Hollywood really didn't want him. He went back to what you said, the thing that he was good at, stand up. And he took a 7-year tour all around the country. For when he came back to Hollywood, he came back with 10 million Twitter followers. And he was bankable at that point. But he said he did stand-up sets for a hamburger for $5.
Yeah.
He said, always use any opportunity, even for free, to perfect and work on your craft. And so that's something I did, but never thinking about not wanting to put your name in certain places. So that's a great piece of advice. And
you know what? I definitely did a lot of free speaking.
I still do, by the way.
And it wasn't really free. So I tell people this too, because my coach shared this with me. Just because you're not getting a check doesn't mean you're doing it for free. You're going to ask the person to give you feedback. You're going to ask them to give you names of other organizations that you could go in front of. So I don't look at it as free, because now I have a solid framework that I'm confident to share on any stage next to anybody, and know that I can hold my own and that I'm going to provide value. But when I first started, George, I did not see the value in what I had to offer. And that's why I was willing to just take it anywhere and put it in front of anybody, even audiences who may not have wanted to or been ready to receive the message. But when you do see the value and you take the time to see the value in what you have to offer first, then you won't be so frivolous with like, oh yeah, I'll just go over here and share it with them and share it. You share it intentionally, and where it's going to be most impactful.
Yeah. And so for anyone listening that's not familiar with Dr. Blades, she's all that. You gotta check her out. You gotta check her out. I saw some stuff on YouTube. I did my research, before I came on here. And so speaking about research on you, so can you explain the concept of your company name, POWARRful Teaching? Because I noticed that it's infused into the titles of your workshops. So can you break that down for us?
George, when I started presenting and just throwing stuff everywhere because they said, come speak, I would usually tailor my workshop to whatever the theme of that conference was. Thankfully for me, I've had enough teaching experience. And in my teaching, I always infuse my passions. So my science students used to get so upset that we did so much writing and public speaking, but that's because of my love of books and ELA, and I wanted to bring that into my science instruction. So I spoke at reading conferences and behavior conferences, because I feel like you can manage student behaviors through a great lesson plan. So I would just tailor it to whatever that conference was about, just as long as I could get in front of a room full of people. But when I started to become more intentional about what I was sharing, and I wanted to package it into something that I could just duplicate, and people would not, I wouldn't be going to people with whatever I could give, but people would be coming to me and saying, I want that thing that you have. I had to start looking at what are the trends in what I'm presenting. And then that helped me realize there was a trend in how I had taught. And there were these 6 themes that just kept coming up and kept coming up. And those are now what I call the 6 core power skills. So power stands for predict, observe, write, analyze, research, and report.
Mm,
And on the surface, it sounds very scientific, but when you look at making predictions, making observations, writing, analyzing, researching, and reporting, these are skills that people need to be successful no matter what they do. So that's where the power skills come from. And whenever I conduct a workshop, I always work those 6 skills into anything that I'm teaching, be it science instruction, be it student engagement, be it technology integration. You're always going to get those power skills.
yeah. And so for anyone listening, anyone watching, you want to be a consultant. One of the things that I learned in the PhD program, which Dr. Blades is a doctor, is that PhD students have to create knowledge. Just think about what I just said, and then think about what she said. She has her own framework. She's collected data from her workshops. She didn't create herself, just because her business model and her themes and everything are an amalgamation of data that she has collected, used to inform what her practices are. And when you see educators that haven't done that work or understand that knowledge, that's where that's what you have to work on.
Yeah.
And so, yeah. And so I appreciate that, because a lot of the frameworks I use and everything like that I have created is through partnerships with school systems where we've been collecting data over a period of months, and in one case, a couple of years. And so when you have something like that, then editors and publishers and folks like that, then they want to listen to you, and then school districts as well. So something to think about. Dr. Blades, you are
Well,
awesome.
coming from you, who has resource on top of resource,
I'm okay.
I'll definitely take that tidbit.
Well, you already got it. I mean, like, you're already doing it. And that's why, I wanted to bring that up, because people are now asking me this more than ever. And the thing is that you need to do your research, and you have to learn how to do research. And you can't really do research unless if you've been through some type of program or some type of course, or someone has engaged you. And so I'm not done with your work though. I'm not done. There's a workshop that you do. It's called Teacher Burnout and Teacher Self-Care. And so the reason why I'm bringing this up, y'all, if you're watching this, if you have an academic program that you're supporting, we all know that our teachers have had the most difficult and stressful year and a half, maybe ever in the history of American education. And so we have finally, as a country, have made an effort to work on social and emotional learning and health, emotional intelligence. And so for the folks that are planning their workshops for over the summer, conferences, back to school, and who need that type of support, Dr. Blades, how can that workshop start the ball rolling and help schools, grow in that way for the long term?
Ooh, okay. So that was the first workshop I created when I left the classroom,
Mm,
probably because that was fresh. I was burned out and, I was physically ill. So that was fresh. And it was immediate for me. And I felt like there must be so many other teachers going through this, but they are not fortunate enough to be able to leave as I was, even though it wasn't a choice, but I was also in a position where I could do it because honestly, if we're just being, completely honest, my health had deteriorated to a point where I probably should have left 3 years before I did,
Wow.
but I had to stay
Mm.
because I needed the insurance, and I was on so much medication that I couldn't afford, like I could barely afford it with the insurance because I was paying tuition trying to complete my doctorate.
Mm.
My mother had to give up her job and be my full-time living caregiver. So I had to take on her expenses as well. So I'm paying our living expenses. I'm paying tuition to finish my doctoral degree. I'm paying copays to go to the doctor and get these expensive medications. And I really was past the point where I was consistently effective in the classroom, even though I was an amazing teacher. And my students got amazing sometimes, but they didn't get it consistently because, there were days when all I could do was walk in the building and sit there until the end of the day. But I needed the insurance so bad that I stayed anyway.
Wow.
But what changed when I got married and my husband saw me go through that, like it was one thing for him to know me as a friend and hear about it. It was something different to live in the house with it and see it every day. And he was like, enough is enough. Like, there's no reason why you should be doing this
Mm.
every day. So at the point that I left, I started to really just be grateful that I could do that and that I had a support system behind me. But then I thought about how many colleagues are suffering like I suffered for all of these years, and there's really nothing they can do about it. And it's hindering their job performance. And so that adds a level of stress when you really want to give everything you have to your students, but you don't have that much. You don't have it to give them.
Mm.
You can't provide the instruction and care and support that they deserve on top of the illness. How bad must that feel? So I thought, I should put together something to help teachers get through that period of burnout until they can get to a better place. And either that better place is going to be moving into a teaching position that's more conducive to their situation, or moving out of the classroom altogether. So that workshop, first thing I have teachers do is reflect on what brought you into teaching in the first place. Why are you here? Why are you in this profession? Reconnect with that. And then secondly, I ask them to reflect on your most successful year as a teacher. And by success, I don't mean you had the highest test scores, you won Teacher of the Year, but that year that you were really connected to your students, you felt good about the instruction that you were providing, you had balance in your life where you were just overall happy. Reflect on that year. What were the practices that you had in place? What were the routines? What were the things that you were doing inside the classroom and outside of the classroom that made life so enjoyable? And I want you to think about how you can bring some of those things back into your daily life now so that you get back into that place. And then the third thing, we look at your instruction and we look at the practices that you are doing that are not high yielding for the students, and they're not high yielding for you either. And we look at ways that you can adjust your instruction so
Mm.
that your students get more out of it. You become less stressed, you get back more of your time, and you feel more inspired every day when you walk into the classroom. And so the combination of those three things I build into this workshop and take the teachers through a series of really just asking themselves some hard questions
Mhm.
and giving those honest answers, and then helping them create an action plan to get themselves back on track.
Mm. You know what I love about you, Dr. Blades? Every conversation, and for folks listening, every conversation leads back to curriculum and instruction.
It does. Yeah. I'm
That,
just,
that's
thank
what I
you,
notice
girl.
about you. That's what I notice about you. And what folks need to realize is that on the educational ship, what guides the education ship is always curriculum and instruction. Always. Right? One of the things that really amazed me about Dr. Zaretta Hammond, she has an article on ASCD, and she said part of culturally responsive teaching is to help students that are culturally and linguistically diverse to become better learners by making them learning partners. And so one of the things that I do in the workshop with the educators is to have them think of, design thinking, computational thinking, inquiry-based learning, Bloom's. Think of it as a framework that needs to become a mindset.
Yes.
So always have that, practice going and going and going so that the young person becomes a learner. And so the same thing goes for our teachers. Not every teacher, first of all, was in a pre-service program. Lots of career switchers, right? And then you have folks that, for whatever reason, may have gotten a lecture in a textbook and not necessarily had the stuff modeled.
Yep.
And so I just love that about you. And so we are wrapping up, but before we do though, this is a question that I like to ask folks. Dr. Blades, in an ideal world, let's say you were in charge, okay? You were Secretary of Ed, let's say. Okay. What are 3 things that we should remove from education right now? And 3 things we should add to education from either the business world or philosophy? And it's your choice.
Oh, okay.
I put you on the spot. Sorry about that.
That's okay. Well, I'm going to start with 3 things to add.
Mm-hmm.
We should definitely add more career-focused programs into education. We should give students more options of what they can study. Mm-hmm. We need to get back on work-based programs. When I graduated, you could graduate with a certificate in something, or you could do college prep, or you could do both. And none of the schools that I have worked in have offered anything like that. So I think we need to get more of that. I definitely think we need to incorporate more pay incentives for teachers. That's a conversation I think we don't have enough. George, when I was a teacher, I probably always had 2 or 3 jobs on the side because I do like to live a certain lifestyle. I'm not a flashy person, but I like to eat, I like to travel, and I like to go to concerts. And when I go to the concert, I like to have good seats. So to support those things, I've always had something on the side. And that something on the side usually catered to those talents that I didn't get to express in the classroom. So we need to be more creative with the pay structure for teachers. And by creative, I just mean increase it and add other ways for teachers to get supplemental pay. And then I'm going to say we need to add in a more talent targeted focus on how we hire our teachers. Because we have a lot of teachers with a lot of creativity and skills that they don't get to incorporate into their teaching that could really enhance their teaching. Some of us just break the rules and we do it anyway. And that's when you see people becoming viral because they find really creative ways to connect with their students. But imagine if that were actually welcomed and students and teachers were encouraged to come in and be their own brand. And we really played up to their talents and we based their teaching schedule and their workload off of the things that teachers are great at. How amazing would that be for our students? Now, the things that we need to take away, we definitely need to take away some of the standardized testing. I'm not going to say completely take it away, but I think the way that we do it, the amount that we give, and what we use it to symbolize, we need to take some of those things away. We need to take away some of the bureaucratic nature of education where something has to go through a particular pipeline or else it just can't happen. Take that away. And then I think we need to take away people running educational institutions who have never been a teacher
Mm.
or who have only been a teacher for 3 years. George, don't get me now. Don't get the other side of me going on this.
Well, all right. So no. So I put you on the spot. So
Yeah, don't even get me on that.
what Dr. Blades meant to say, what she's implied, is that 3 years should not be the ruler for making someone an expert. However, there are people that are phenomenal teachers or phenomenal instructional leaders. 3 years, 4 or 5 years in. I was not one of them. However, I think that if someone is truly an instructional leader, then they should be permitted to lead.
George, thank you so much for cleaning that up. See, that's the Griffin side. That's the Griffin side. If a person has demonstrated, keyword being demonstrated, but like you said, it can't just be 3 years on paper. That's what I mean.
Yeah. And leading means to go first, means to lead by example.
Yes.
And so we should never ask our people to do anything that we shouldn't do ourselves. Someone on Twitter was asking about that. And, this young man, in fact, I'm going to shout him out real quick, if that's okay with you.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I don't know him, but he got a lot of retweets with this question. His name is JBS Speaks. That's his handle. So follow this guy.
George, I actually followed him after your retweet.
Yeah, so I wrote.
Pretty much anybody you retweet, I just follow them, because if you're following them, I know I need to be following them.
Well, I appreciate that. So I wrote, in my opinion, and if I were given the choice, I'd prefer school administrators / instructional leaders participate start to finish in the same PD that the teachers do, actively co-creating lessons and learning to implement strategies, curriculum and instruction, tailored for their students at their school. And so I just wholeheartedly, I don't think someone needs to know everything when they get into their job, but they need to be willing to roll the sleeves up, which is why I always have them rolled up. All right, Dr. Blades, look, it's been a pleasure. And I really enjoyed this, and thank you for the opportunity. But in all fairness, this is still your show. And this is still your audience, so you get the last word.
Well, George, just like my classroom, I don't have to always be in charge. So it is nice to sit back and follow the leadership of someone else. So thank you for doing this. This has been an amazing conversation, and I always learn so much from you. I guess the last thing that I want to share with you all is to sign up for the Teach to Empower conference. George and I didn't talk about it, but there are several other conversations about it you all can find on my YouTube channel. Y'all make sure you connect with me on social media. I am POWARRful Teaching across most platforms: Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Pinterest. On Twitter, I am POWARRful Teach. There are so many wonderful things that are coming ahead. I have developed some amazing relationships and partnerships with other outstanding educators. And that's probably the main thing that y'all are gonna see coming from my platform, is just all of the collaboration that I like to do with other educators. So thank you for joining. Thank you again, George. You want to tell everybody how they can follow you?
Well, it's really about you, but if you insist, at George Does PBL, that is JORGE, and I am actually going to be keynoting the POWARRful Conference, teaching conference. So on my social media, you're about to see me light up Dr. Marquita Blades. So for the next 15 days, we need people to register, sign up, and to get involved as POWARRful Teaching. And it was a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
All right. See y'all in the next episode of POWARRful Teaching with Dr. Blades.